This week's Parsha, Pinchas. The Zohar in Pinchas is one of the most famous pieces of Zohar. It's a very long Zohar. It's connected with healing. So we'll learn a few little pieces, a few little shtiklach, little parts of Zohar to understand a little bit, something deeper about this week's Parsha. So the story is, the way the Torah describes the story at the beginning of Pinchas and the end of last week's Parsha, is a story of the zealotry of Pinchas, Bikanas Kanasi, when he acts in a very zealot way. When there was a plague and there was tremendous amount of death and hardship, Magefa, essentially, that was occurring to the people of Klal Yisrael, the people of Israel, because of an act that they were acting from a place of there was idol worship and promiscuity. And one of the leaders of the congregation, one of the leaders of the tribes, performed a public act of physical intimacy with another woman. And Pinchas came and asked Moshe Rabbeinu what should be done, and he said that he remembers the law that it says that you should, a kanai, a zealot person, could take actions, could take the law into his own hands. And Moshe says, whoever reads the letter, whoever opens the letter should read the letter. So therefore Pinchas goes ahead and he takes a spear, he takes a roimach, takes a spear in his hand, and he kills them both, and the plague ends. This is the story. So it's an act of zealotry, and Hashem says that because of this, he becomes a kohen, and he gets the blessing of peace. So Pinchas acts in a very zealot way. Pinchas, the word Pinchas, Peinon Ches Samach, is an numeric value of 208, which is the numeric value of the word Yitzchak, which has the idea of gevura, strength, restraint, discipline. This is a very active kanois. This idea of zealotry seems to be an act of gevura. He takes a roimach biyadei, a roimach, which is a spear. The Zohar says is the roimach reish mem ches, which is harmach. 248 is the same numeric value as the word avram, which is chesed, kindness. And he performs this act. And we have to understand a little bit, just to, in our own lives, and certainly on a very general level, what does it mean to act in zealotry? And how do we know when we act a certain way from a sense of kanois, a sense of zealotry, holy zealotry? Is this something that is commendable? Is it something that is desirable? And how do we know when this action that we're taking is in fact holy? Is it coming from a positive place? Or is it possible that we find, and this is certainly true very often, that people that act from a place of zealotry usually comes from a place of their own insecurities and their own uncertainties about what they believe in, or some type of acting out from a subconscious place of a type of repression that's showing up in terms of zealotry, especially someone's acting out in zealotry towards another person that's doing something, an act that is prohibited, that is something that is a violation of certain morality or spiritual morality or violation of Torah, that sometimes it actually doesn't come from a positive place. How do you know, how does a person gauge whether the thing that is this act of zealotry is a positive thing or a holy thing, and something that's coming from a noble place? Now, the way the Torah describes Pinchas, when it describes his name, it says Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, who's the son of Aaron HaKohen. Now, Aaron is the Isha Chesed. Aaron is the Oidev Shalom, Roidev Shalom. Aaron is the man of peace, the man of Chesed. So much so that it says Pinchas ben. Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron. So the Zohar reads and says like this: Pinchas ben. So the Zohar goes along and explains that the souls of Nadav and Avihu, the children of Aaron, were impregnated into the soul of Pinchas. That means that while Pinchas is alive, he received these extra two souls of the sons of Aaron who died in a state of ecstasy. or impregnated into his own soul. And therefore, the Zohar says, Pinchas ben Trezim. The Pinchas ben Elazar ben. Therefore, the Torah says that he's ben, which means the son of the son. Which essentially the Zohar is saying is that Pinchas is considered the son of Aaron HaKohen, because since he has an impregnation of the sons of Aaron within him, so he's technically, on a spiritual level, he's considered a son of Aaron. So we see that a fundamental idea is that Pinchas is the son of, or he's birthed in kindness, in compassion, in chesed, which means that the first basic understanding of this is that the idea of kanois, the idea of acting in a state of zealotry, and something that is beyond the letter of the law. And if you come to the courts and you ask the courts whether this person deserves to be punished, and is some type of retribution has to be taken against this person, the law cannot dictate. It's beyond the letter of the law. Allah of Amarin, this is the law, but it's not. You don't dispense such type of law, and you have to take it into your own hand. You're taking judgment, like a certain type of vigilance, that you're saying the law. I'm going to do something that if I ask the high courts, if I ask the Bezdin, it's something that they would not permit, or certainly not. They wouldn't condone. And certainly they wouldn't be able to rule that this is what I should be doing. I'm going to do this anyways. So how do you know if this thing that you're doing, this type of kanos, is coming from a good place? The first thing that the Zohar is saying is that it has to come from a place of ben. It has to be birthed from a place of kindness. And then if you act in the contrary way, which means if you act in a way of the opposite of kindness, or seemingly the opposite of kindness, you're acting in a way of din, or a way of judgment, and you're taking judgment into your own hand. If the type of actions that you're taking and the zealotry that you're taking is contrary to your own nature, the own nature is that you would be kind in this situation and be compassionate, and yet you choose to act this way, proactively choose to act this way, then you can say that it's not coming from your subconscious place. It's not coming from an unresolved issue and uncertainty. It's coming because this thing is a terrible thing that you're seeing, and you're going to act in zealotry to stop this thing from happening. But it's only a truth, and it's only a healthy and a spiritual healthy idea if it comes from a place that's contrary to your nature, which my nature is I would not do this, but I see the situation and it demands for me to stand up to the situation and do something contrary to my nature. So I'm not acting out because I'm an angry person. I'm not acting out because I'm a person that's disturbed. I'm not acting out because there's a subconscious unresolved issue here. I'm acting because this is the right thing to do. That's the first level. That's one way. That's one way to gauge whether this type of kanais, this type of zealotry, is it birthed in love, and is it birthed from a place that's contrary to my nature. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. The Zohar continues to explain a little further on. This is the Zohar Raya Mehamda. The Zohar talks about, this is a long piece of Zohar. Within here, the Zohar says that in this exile, it's talking about the exiles. So it says in this exile, now in this long, protracted, long period of exile, we need a wise doctor, a wise physician to heal us, a wise healer to heal. To understand how high, what level of the pulse of the deafening of the person, of the choil of the sick person, which is the Shekhinah, the state, is on what level it is, which is something about the pulse, that checking of the pulse, obviously the spiritual pulse over here, but something about checking, the idea of checking the pulse of the people, and understanding that in the state of exile, the pulse is the pulse of the people, of the collective people, is in a very unstable state. So what is this idea? This idea is of a person's pulse is connected to obviously to the heartbeat, and the pulse is the throbbing of the arteries when blood is pumped in from the heart. So the way it works is that when a person takes an inhale, so your diaphragm contracts and your lungs expand, and you bring in air, which is oxygen, into your body. And now this oxygenated, rich blood then goes into the heart. And from the heart now takes this new oxygen-filled blood and distributes it throughout the entire body. And that's what happens when a person inhales. And in the process of exhale, you're exhaling the negativity, so to speak. You're exhaling the carbon dioxide, things that are toxic, and you're exhaling through your nose or your mouth. So this is what happens when a person breathes. And what in the sense of breathing, bringing in new oxygen and getting rid of the carbon dioxide, this process is reflected in the person's pulse. Now, the Exile teaches in Shar Ruach HaKodesh, in the beginning of Shar Ruach HaKodesh, the Ari says, in the gates of Holy Spirit, in the gates of Ruach HaKodesh, the Ari speaks about that a person that has training and sensitivity and spiritual sensitivity could tell, just like you could tell about a person's physical health through taking his pulse or her pulse. The same thing also you can tell about a person's spiritual and inner ailments or inner disharmony or disconnectivity that's going on within a person through taking their pulse, by feeling the rhythm of the pulse, the velocity of the pulse, the spacing. And essentially the Exile speaks about this idea of that there are 10 types of pulses that a person can have, and they correspond, which is like lines and dots, like the pulse, like little beats. And these beats of the pulse correspond to these 10 types of variations of the beats correspond to the 10 spheres. That there are 10 spheres, and these 10 spheres correspond to the 10 vowels. There's 9 vowels, but the 10th vowel is Malchus, which means it doesn't have a sound of its own. So these 10 pulses correspond to the 10 spheres. So, for example, he says if a person has, let's say, a single beat followed by another single beat that's slightly off into the side, that represents the sound of Tseire. Tseire corresponds the sound of A, which corresponds to the sphere of Bina. So, which this means that a person's intellect, the power of their cerebral understanding of things, it can mean two things. Either they're having an excess of this in a positive way, or they're having a deficiency, and therefore the pulse shows up with a Tseire beat. Similar for, let's say, if you have like a kometz is shaped with a line and with a small dot underneath that. So if a person's pulse if you have a longer beat, which is like a longer sound, which is, and then it's accompanied by a smaller one, so together that line and that circle would represent the shape of the kometz, and kometz, the sound of is connected to the world of Keser, and inwardly Keser is connected to a person's desire and will. So again, what this means is that there's a possibility that there is some type of deficiency within a person that's connected to his will. And the same thing, all the 9 vowels are connected with lines and dots. So let's say a chirik is a dot and a shuruk is 3 dots. So it depends. If you have 3 small beats of that corresponds to the sphera, to shuruk, and the same thing. So every all the vowels correspond to a particular sphere. So if a person that rewrites, Reb Chaim Vital ends this conversation saying that people don't really understand this and people shouldn't do it, and it's very hard to know whether what you're sensing is that there is an excess of this sphere, or there is not enough of this emotion that's going on within a person. So a person shouldn't be too involved in this idea. But either way, we see that there was a spiritual understanding, a certain Kabbalistic understanding, that everything that's going on within inside of a person on a psychic level, on a fundamental nefesh level, on a soul level, and even in terms of the way he's thinking about the world and his emotional state, is reflected in the body. And where is it reflected in the body? In the pulse of the person, in the heartbeat of the person, which is reflected in the pulse. So let's read a little bit more in the Zohar, what the Zohar has to say about this. So the Zohar says like this: that now that we're in a state of galus, shcholos avani, therefore we're in a state of improvise. We're in a state of we're like sick with love. the kama asyan iskanshala. And there are many healers that are, many doctors, many tzaddikim that are charged to heal this generation. Lam indicates the mardilan ba'elam dafik. To understand the nature of when this exile will end, according to the levels of the beats of the pulse. And the Zohar says that not every person understands the heartbeat of the people. So let's to understand this. What the Zohar is saying is, just like what Ari is talking about, which is individually that a person has some type of thing, something's going on within them, is reflected in the heartbeat, reflected in the pulse, and a person that has a certain sensitivity can tell what is missing and what is deficient and what is needed in a person. A person needs to think more, a person needs to love more, a person needs more discipline based on the heartbeats. That's reflected in the pulse. The same thing also with the collective, with the Knesset Yisrael, with the entire people of Israel. There's a heartbeat to Klal Yisrael. There's a certain pulse. Klal Yisrael is beating to a certain rhythm. There's a certain velocity and a certain rhythm that the people collectively are beating to. And the Zohar explains that you really need to be a true healer to really understand what is the pulse of Klal Yisrael, and essentially through that, like the Kuzi writes, is the Klal Yisrael is the lev of Ummah, is the heart of humanity. So through that, to understand what is the heartbeat of humanity at this present moment, and a person really needs to be a true doctor, a true healer, to understand what is the pulse, what is the heartbeat of this generation, what are people struggling with, and where is their deficiency, and how can it help? How can we help this? And the Zohar continues like this: there are different types of heartbeats. And it says it's like it's similar to a tkiya shvarim tu and a tkiya shvarim tkiya tu a tkiya. That the heartbeats are symbolic also of this, the idea of the blowing of the shofar. That the blowing of the shofar, literally you're blowing wind, like exhaling, like the Shalach Kadosh writes, through the shofar. So the sounds of the shofar, there's the tkiya, which is the long sound. Then the shvarim is the broken three sounds, and then there's the small little sounds, da 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 da, and then there's the tkiya. Then there's different types of sounds that are being created through the pulse. And the Zohar continues that tkiya shukol aruch, that the idea of a tkiya, which is a long sound, that represents the lengthiness of exile. Shvarim, which are shorter sounds. What are the shorter sounds? Kiv de Glusa. This shows that we're nearing the end of exile. And Trua, which is the sound of very short bursts of sounds. That represents Yesepurka, that the redemption is about to come, which is short breath. Because the sound of this, it's almost like the sound of a person catching their breath. Short breaths. A person's like out of breath. That shows on the density of exile, the hardship of exile, and there's redemption is about to happen. So short breaths, that you can't catch your breath. There's longer breaths, which is more peaceful and ease type of breathing, longer, deeper breathing. And then there's shorter breathing, like when a person's out of breath. Koitzer ruach, when a person's short of breath, represents the hardship of exile. It speaks about, in the Torah talks about Moshe. The people that were enslaved in Egypt weren't able to listen to Moshe because they weren't able to listen to Moshe because they had short breath. And Rashi brings down that anyone that's in a meitzar, anyone that's in a state of constriction or hardship or in a state of panic, is rucham v'nishmasik tzara. Their breath is very shortened. They have short breaths, and they can't have longer breaths, which means fast-paced breaths, short, quick breaths. Fast-paced represents a state of trauma or something that's very difficult and of stress. So there is different heartbeats, And what the Zohar is saying is that a wise healer is able to sense the heartbeat of the people, and based on the shortness or the length of their breath, to understand what kind of state are they in a state of. Are they in a distress state? Are they in a state of panic or in a state of comfort? And based on the breaths, whether it's longer or shorter, and the shorter it is, the more, and it shows up in the pulse of the people, sort of in the way that people are acting. Sort of the idea of that people have short breath is maybe this also why the idea of people also have short attention spans in this generation. There's the doichuk of the gullus, the density and the hardship and the stress of exile causes people to have panic in terms of their breath, and because of that they also have a discombobulated mind. They have maybe ADHD or something, because the idea of the shortness of the quick-paced idea is that it represents a state of in distress. And that's and as I was saying, that this idea of the shortness of breath is also an indication that redemption is about to happen, that there's about to be an opening. It's like it's the sound of the shofar, the final sound of the shofar, the tekiah, the redemption is about to happen, of the longer breath. So, what is the way to deal with this intensity of exile where there's shorter breath? So there's two ways to think about this. One way is, to gauge the generation, to gauge the consciousness of people in this present moment, in the end of exile, where people have short breath, and say because people have short breath and short attention spans, one way to gauge that in a positive way is to do things quickly. Then make sure that people are always occupied with doing actions, being busy, moving from one thought to the next thought, but consciously. So that's one way of doing it, which is a way of when a person is short of breath, to use that in itself and say, okay, how can we use this for a positive? Because you have attention deficit disorder, or because you can't focus and you're always short of breath, how could you take this energy of the shortness of the breath and use it in a positive way in a context of something that's holy and positive? So that would mean to be very busy, to do positive things, to constantly be active in doing mitzvahs and helping other people. That would be like one posture of that idea. And the other one, of course, is the opposite idea, which is to create calm in a state of panic. When there's panic, to create deeper breaths, metaphorically and literally. And this is the idea of Pinchas. Going back to this idea of Pinchas, which we asked, that the act of Pinchas, which is an act of kanais, which is an act of in a state of stress, a certain way of immediately stopping the play. You see that the things are losing control, and the morality and the ethics of the people are completely unraveling very quickly. So you've got to take an action, a quick action, an action of zealotry, something you have to stand up and ensure that there's a pause in this thing. But the word Pinchas, like the Mekabalim say, the word Pinchas, the root of the word Pinchas is Noach. The word of the root Pinchas, it either has the word chas, which in Aramaic means compassion. Pinchas, the root of the word Pinchas actually is the word Noach, which is peacefulness and restfulness, yinachmeni, and comfort. That there is the act of a kohen. Now, on one hand, a kohen, remember Pinchas ben Aaron HaKohen, he's called the son of Aaron HaKohen, he becomes a kohen through this. Is that the idea of a kohen is that on one hand, kohenim zrizim, they do things with alacrity, very quick. So therefore, there's a sense of this quickness that the kohen is doing. This is almost like the act that Pinchas does. Is like he stands up very strongly and takes a spear in his hand. And this is also literally, but also a very strong metaphor. Like you take a spear in your hand and take a stand, and you do an action very quickly. But on the other hand, alacrity, the idea of zrizus, is not to do things in haste. Like the Baal Shem Tov says, avad mahero, a person has to lose the hastefulness. But you look at the story of Avram, which is the Isar Chesed, the Roimach, going back to the spear, that Avram is Isha Chesed, Avram is the person of compassion, of kindness. And Avram, we learn the whole idea of Zuz Maktimim, that idea of to do things with alacrity, with quickness. We learn from Avram, because Vayashma Avram Avram wakes up the first thing in the morning. to go to the Akedah, to go to the binding of Isaac. But he was told the night before that he has to go to the binding, but it doesn't say Avram immediately took the donkey and went to the Akedah, which means that night. No, Avram went to sleep, and Vayashka, and he slept very peacefully, because it doesn't say that he had a restless sleep, but he slept very peacefully. And then Vayashka, when the time came right, because a person has to leave only in the morning, a person should leave in the morning. So therefore, when the time was right to get up, then he got up. So he went to sleep and slept peacefully. And then Vayashkem, he got up the first thing in the dawn, the first thing in the morning. That's the idea of creating alacrity, or creating a stand, or taking a stand from a place of a deep breath, from a place of a deep inhale. And that's maybe also what the Torah is alluding to, what the Zohar is explaining, and why the Zohar, particularly the Raya Mehemeth, speaks about this idea of the breath and the length of breath and the shortness of breath in this week's Parsha, is also perhaps related to this idea of Pinchas, of Zealotry. How do you know in your own life whether the thing that you're standing up to, again, is not coming from a subconscious unresolved issue, and it's not coming from a place of your ego, and it's not coming from a place because someone offended you, but it's coming because you see that the very fabric of society is unraveling, and you need to take a stand? Is the way to do this is not to be reactive, to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do because this is what happens. That's the immediacy. That's the short breath response. It's the contrary, taking a deep noach, taking a deep breath, pausing, seeing if I am in control, not losing control, and then choosing to act in a certain way, in a zealot way. And let's translate that into 1,000 lower levels into our own lives, and certainly with people with that are raising children. This is very important. That how do you know when you're doing something to your child, to discipline your child, whether you're doing it from a place of your own insecurities, or you're trying to live vicariously through your children, or you're really doing it for the benefit of your children? How do you know when you're disciplining them? Is it the correct thing? Is it when they do something, if you react in a certain way and they did something that you feel is something that needs discipline, and then the first thing is right away you flare up and you react in a certain way, then you know that's something that's negative, because that's coming from your own ego. But if you could pause and you could take a breath and you can gather yourself and say, okay, the way I should act now, and to show my child that they need discipline for their own benefit and for their own, and as essentially something that's birthed in my own kindness, and Aaron HaKohen, it's birthed in this kindness, and I'm going to act in this way, then you know that what you're doing is a healthy and a holy thing. So the lesson that we're learning, what the Zohar is saying, is that it has to be something that's not coming from a place of reaction. It's not coming from a place of just, this is who I am and I'm reacting this way, but it almost is contrary to your nature. That was the first thing that we learned. And the other thing is, could you pause? Could you stop? Could you take a deep breath? And in general, the Zohar is saying, in this last period of exile, before we finally achieve and receive, and is a revealing of the ultimate redemption and the coming of Mashiach, that before this time period, right in the depth of exile, where there's this shortness of breath and people can't catch their breath and people are in a state of panic and distress, could we pause? Could we take a deep breath? And the deeper breath that we can take, the more it ensures that the choices that we're going to make and the way we're going to proactively engage in this world will be in the healthy and the holiest way. Have a wonderful Shabbos.